Well, welcome back to the hot seat. I'm delighted today to be joined by Richard Grasby, partner from Appleby in Hong Kong. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
So looking forward to seeing you at the PCD lunch here in the Ritz-Carlton in Singapore later on. For PCD members who've not met you before, it'd be really interesting to hear a little bit more about your background and role at Appleby.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, I've met quite a lot of people at PCD events before, but obviously this is the first trip that I've done in 3 years because of Hong Kong's position just opening up now. I'm a lawyer at Appleby, as you mentioned. I have been working as an offshore lawyer for many, many years. I've actually lived and worked in Jersey, in London, in Cayman Islands, and in Hong Kong since 2009.
Okay, and perhaps tell us what's the latest from Hong Kong? You know, what's the latest position there?
It's opening up slowly. We don't have quarantine anymore. We still have one of the strictest mask mandates going around, vaccination, scrutiny for certain events, but it's getting there, I think. The airport was busier, but it's not as busy as it has been, and optimism is coming back.
What's the sentiment amongst professionals like? Are people now a bit of positivity is returning, opportunities returning?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Hong Kong's unique position as the gateway to mainland China is impacted by what's happening in China. But actually Hong Kong is also a global city. So actually practitioners like myself, I don't go all in on mainland China for a number of reasons. I use Hong Kong as a geographic hub. Whilst travel is difficult, then face-to-face meetings are more difficult, and that does impact quite a lot of our business. Private banking, private wealth, there's quite a lot of the personal touch needed, so you need to meet people in person. Institutional work is picking up, but global markets at the moment are having issues, and that's not a Hong Kong problem. The Chinese property market is having some debt issues. Digital assets is affecting the global economy. That's not a Hong Kong issue. So there's a few issues with listings and things, but no, it's picking up.
And what kind of clients do you work with?
Oh, a whole range of clients from across the globe. As I said, I just view Hong Kong as my hub. I'm not a Hong Kong lawyer, so actually Hong Kong is a base from which to travel out or for clients to come in, and we cover the whole spectrum of clients from individuals to their entities to institutions. So it can be the trust companies themselves, it can be corporates, it can be private clients.
So it could be, say, a restructuring of an existing client or planning for a liquidity event, for example?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, once we've got the client, then we need to see what we can help them with. We can't help different people if they've got different interests, because lawyers are obviously subject to conflicts rules probably more than other professionals.
And why do you think it's important for entrepreneurs and business owners and people with wealth to undertake planning? What are the challenges of bringing them to the table to actually get that planning done as well?
Well, there's a number of challenges. Firstly, at a basic human level, people don't necessarily want to face their mortality or deal with things that are quite negative. So divorces, loss of mental capacity, death I've mentioned, that they're not things that people enjoy talking about or enjoy facing up to. Then you've obviously got clients who are very private. They don't want to fully tell you their affairs, so it's quite difficult to advise them with only half the facts. Cost is obviously a factor, but that's partly because if people don't understand necessarily what's involved, then they can't put a value to it. And then also people are busy. So actually the entrepreneurs are very good at making money, very good at doing deals, and don't spend the time on looking to preserve that.
And what's your assessment of advisors in Hong Kong around wealth planning and tabling these topics with their clients? Is that something that you see now proactively done by banks and other professionals sat around these clients, prompting them to actually undertake the planning?
Yeah, I mean, Hong Kong has got a long history of private wealth advising. So there's a good strength in depth across the banks, the trust companies, the law firms in Hong Kong. Obviously, there are different areas that certain people concentrate on. There's linguistic and cultural issues for certain clients, but the bigger players tend to have those bases covered. I mean, we have Chinese speakers because some people prefer speaking in their own language for certain personal issues, but the levels of English across Asia are very good. But mother tongue still may be the one that people want to talk about personal affairs.
And you work with jurisdictions all around the world. Within Appleby, there's many jurisdictions. You've worked in many places yourself. How do you see globally different jurisdictions being selected for planning? Is there an increasing sort of harmonisation as regulation and global standards come in, or what do you see as some of the differences between jurisdictions?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the level of sophistication for the structuring. If you're a sort of low-end, high net worth, if that makes sense, then you can be a little bit more product-driven, where the jurisdictional differences aren't a huge factor. If you're at the top of the ladder, then you should be looking at some of the differences, and different clients take certain differences in a different way. So, for example, we would promote our jurisdictions, certainly Cayman, BVI, Jersey, Guernsey, Bermuda, by having access to legal services across the world's financial centres. Other jurisdictions that are very good jurisdictions don't have the offering of lawyers from those jurisdictions outside of the home territory. So there are certain jurisdictions where you can only get advice from that jurisdiction, and it's in the wrong time zone or it's in the wrong place geographically. So availability of advice is one factor. Quality of the service providers, quality of the regulator. Now, is A regulator better than B regulator? Who's to say? But certainly you can have an idea about the quality of the service providers to get an idea about the environment in which they operate.
And whether things will change quickly without you kind of expect the consistency of the regulator, isn't it, and their previous actions.
And then you've got certain structures that are better developed in those jurisdictions, or how the regulator, how easy it is to set something up. So things like private trust companies, there are differences between jurisdictions in terms of cost, in terms of regulatory supervision, in terms of formalities as to naming and things like that, and then cost. So they're not all the same. Certain advisors who are maybe more generalist don't necessarily have the expertise to distinguish between the jurisdictions. You've got, and then you're also looking at it from the outside's perspective. So who's going to be dealing with this structure? What's their view of X jurisdiction? So obviously, the counterparties, institutions may not like jurisdictions that work perfectly well from the client's perspective, but if no one wants to do business with them, or it's difficult to open an account, then you have to shift accordingly.
And how are you seeing the substance requirements impacting on choice of jurisdiction, or is that something that is driving choice, or not really? That's affecting jurisdictions across the board?
I mean, substance for pure private wealth holding, it isn't really that intrusive, but it is still an extra burden that the clients have been facing up to. So some of the jurisdictions are being targeted perhaps, but it's catching up. I mean, Hong Kong is having to change is changing its tax law because of perceived lack of substance in some respects, and effectively, the world is much more transparent. If you're going to be having things like fund management, where you actually need to have directors and meetings in the jurisdiction itself, that's more of a inconvenience or a certain change of tact.
Okay, and is preempting disputes important when creating new structures, working out what might happen, where it might end up in court, and that being part of the overall planning discussion?
I mean, the what ifs. however remote, still need to be addressed. Things are not impossible to happen, even though they're unlikely to happen. But things, unfortunately, death is not unlikely to happen. Loss of capacity is not that unlikely to happen because people are living a lot longer. So actually, stress testing structures is very important. Where there's a controlling individual, everything is done instantly with no discussions needed. It's one person, and that's obviously can lead to the success because decisions can be taken quickly. But once that person is not there, and you've got a more widely held structure or widely held family governance operation, then people disagree with each other. So disputes will happen, and particularly where there's a lot of money at stake. So stress testing is something that we do. What happens to this structure if the guy can't take any decisions anymore? What happens if the matriarch passes away? How are her powers under the trust deed dealt with? They can't just sit there in the ether. So stress testing, who's got access to information, where is information, divorces unfortunately in some jurisdictions are more likely than not. So actually you've got to assume that that's going to happen at some point in the family.
Are you seeing more prenups being used off the back of that? I know there have been some big cases which have pointed in the direction of clients really using prenups to protect wealth.
See prenups, but they're more complicated than people make out. Today's families and individuals are much more international than ever before. So they have connections to multiple jurisdictions, and therefore the sort of conflicts of law management or looking at issues between jurisdictions is far more prevalent than it used to be. You can have clients with multiple nationalities, multiple residences. It's not that uncommon for clients to have assets in multiple jurisdictions, whereas previously they just had a very local affair and not necessarily that high net worth. You'll find, middle class, whatever that means, could own properties in Australia and the UK, and they're living in Hong Kong. Well, I've immediately got 3 jurisdictions that I've got to look at, and then I've also got to say, well, which territory of Australia, because their laws are different as well. So actually, you can suddenly start building together quite a complicated jigsaw puzzle from what the client may think is a relatively simple set of affairs, and that leads to this takes a bit longer. This costs a little bit more, but you've got to do it properly. There's no one size fits all.
And just zooming out and looking at Asia as a region and the economy and the dynamics of wealth creation in the region. I mean, as someone who's lived in Hong Kong now for many years, but has also lived in other parts of the world, what do you see as sort of most exciting about being in Asia, the different parts of those different jurisdictions and parts of the economies there that are exciting and have huge growth potential?
Yeah, I mean, Asia's obviously the largest continent with lots of diverse jurisdictions, and you can't lump them all together. And there are in different cycles of their evolution. I mean, people talk about Vietnam as being the sort of the new kid on the block, but there are capital controls and things there, but that's one to watch. India obviously has huge potential, but it's quite regulated jurisdiction, but certainly has trusts, has probate, English is the official language, has over 1 billion people, and has families who are not just in India. So actually they become international cross-border type clients. I'm keen to do more with the Middle East. We've got lots of wealth transfer issues there and not so much tax constraints. Then obviously,
yeah, I mean, on the Middle East, I was in Riyadh earlier this week. I was speaking with lawyers and other professionals who were actually making that point of the link to Asia, the traditional corridor out of Saudi being up to Switzerland and UK. So I think that in a multipolar world, actually unlocking different strategic alliances and investment flows is going to be an interesting one to watch, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, I mean, the Singapore or KL links to the Middle East and India are pretty strong. Hong Kong has global ties to lots of places. And certainly there's no reason why the Middle Eastern family shouldn't look east. Actually in Hong Kong, we're basically the same time difference to London, and basically the same flying time. It's just that historically, as you mentioned, the clients like to go to Kensington or Geneva rather than coming to Hong Kong. But certainly I think there's a play for Singapore with more Middle Eastern work.
And what is the view of the UK out of Hong Kong? You know, what is it, do you think, that local high net worths, they still like the UK as a place to come, perhaps a place to live, place to invest? What's your view?
It's certainly a place to invest. And actually there's been a bit more interest because the pound is relatively weak. It's the weakest that's been since I've been in Hong Kong. So people are looking at property, but obviously the UK's tax position isn't as favourable since 2017. And a lot of clients, I'm sure, haven't even realised that yet. Schools for middle class children, the UK is by far the most popular. I think Australia second. Historic ties are lower than they were because it's 25 years this year since the handover. But still, the infrastructure, the legal system is still heavily based and influenced by the UK.
And what kind of ties from Hong Kong do you see out to the US as well? I mean, do you see investment into US companies and real estate, or what might you see out of a Hong Kong family into the US? Are they equally interested in that as European investment, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean the US is has strong links anywhere. US property. I mean, there are certain clusters of North America which are very heavily invested by Hong Kong or mainland Chinese. In Canada and West Coast, East Coast of US. The chances are when you get to a third generational family, probably one of them will be US citizen or US resident. Therefore, your structure needs to adapt accordingly. Clients from Taiwan have strong links to the US, Indonesia, Philippines. The studying in the US universities is probably more than the UK universities for those jurisdictions, and therefore you've immediately got potential US tax issues through marriage, through residency, and that needs to be factored in as well. So the same family could easily need planning for the UK and the US, and that's before you start looking at more complex structuring.
And we've got the PCD lunch today. But we're at the start of a week of Step Asia. People really excited, I think, to be back together. What are you looking forward to in the Step conference? Is the agenda is already set out for delegates? Is there anything you're particularly interested, or you think people will be talking about at the conference?
I think people are just glad that the conference is happening. I mean, it's the first one since 2019, and in person, and I believe 400 people. Although I'll have to see for the welcome drinks tonight. The agenda's always good, but a lot of people are there for the networking as well as the learning. So I'm just glad to be there and at your lunch today.
Great. Well, look, Richard, thanks for talking to me today, and we look forward to sharing this interview.
Thank you, David.